Hello, if you are still there. Today we are going to speak about sanction. Sanction is a tricky word. It's ambiguous. It has two meanings, and these meanings are contradictory. It has both a positive and negative meaning. The positive meaning means approval of some sort, permission. The negative meaning means punishment or some sort of a strong action to make people obey. Now you may wonder, how do we know the difference? And it's very important to know the difference because they have such opposite meanings. Usually it is very contextual, and we can see by the words that surround sanction what it means. For instance, in the phrase to give sanction to or grant sanction to, it usually has the positive meaning of granting permission or granting approval, whereas the negative meaning of punishment is used in phrases like issue sanctions against or impose sanctions on. And then we often see that the negative meaning is described by various different adjectives like criminal sanctions or trade sanctions or economic sanctions, or we can talk about lifting sanctions. For instance, we often hear the state will impose criminal sanctions against those who are convicted of a crime. The United Nations will impose trade sanctions on countries which violate human rights, and these are all always negative. Sanction is also a verb, and in the verb, just like in the noun form, we have these two meanings. For instance, you can say the countries sanctioned the use of force against terrorists. From that context, we understand that sanctioned means that the countries have given their approval or permission to use force against the terrorists. Or in the negative meaning, we can say that the company sanctioned had to pay a fine of $1 million. We understand from the fact that they had to pay a fine that they were sanctioned in a negative way, that was the way they were punished. We also have the adjective sanctionable, and again, just like the noun and the verb, this also has two meanings. For instance, we can say that right now in California, marijuana, although it is legally not permitted, it is socially sanctionable and medically sanctionable, and then we use the positive meaning. And for the negative meaning, we can say that the lawyer's failure to prepare for trial was sanctionable by the Bar Association, and here it's clear that we know that it is a bad thing not to prepare for trial, and that the Bar Association sanctions lawyers with disciplinary sanctions. Now we will speak about taxes. Well, particularly tax evasion and tax avoidance. Tax evasion is escaping payment by illegal means. This is obviously unlawful, and it is usually a criminal offense and is subject to a prison term or a fine if one is guilty of it. The person guilty of such offense is referred to as a tax evader. An example sentence where you can use this is, it is likely that he will go to prison if convicted of tax evasion. Tax avoidance, on the other hand, is perfectly legal within the ambit of the law, and it is the legal use of the tax system to reduce taxes. This can take many different forms. Typical examples are where an individual changes their tax residence to a country which has a lower income tax rate, For example, the Cayman Islands and a country like that. These sorts of countries are known as tax havens. An individual might also want to transfer assets to a company which the individual indirectly owns or directly owns, and this would also be a way of minimizing the tax bill. A lot of business transactions are also set up in a way so as to avoid paying too much tax. An example sentence of where the term tax avoidance is used is: the law firm set up a scheme that was aimed primarily at tax avoidance. There is also another term which is used: tax mitigation. This is avoiding tax legally, but it's more in the context of typical family tax planning, where, for example, you move assets to your spouse in order to minimize your personal tax bill and make use of their tax allowances. Bear in mind that there is often a fine line between avoiding tax, which is legal, and tax evasion, evading tax, which is illegal. As a tax lawyer, you should be very careful to make sure that your clients do not cross that line.